So for those of you who are new to us, Nest Insight is a public benefit research and innovation centre founded by Nest. Everything we do is focused on finding better ways to support people living in low and moderate income households to be financially secure, thinking both about today and also into the longer term. Our work is supported by our strategic partners, the BlackRock Foundation, JP Morgan Chase and Nest, as well as project partners. This structure allows us to come at problems in a way that is both solution and provider agnostic. And we hope that that means that we're able to step back and consider solutions that are grounded in the context and the needs of the households that we serve. Wherever possible, as those of you who know our work will know, we test those ideas in the real world, and we're trying to build a robust evidence base for what works and also what doesn't. We are grateful to DWP for continuing to support this strand of our work that is focused on self-employed people and retirement saving. I think we can all agree that's a big problem, and historically it has been difficult to solve. I'd like to thank all of the partners who have worked with us on this through working groups, involvement in research and trials. Many of you are here in the room or online. Today we would especially like to thank Lloyds Banking Group for their partnership on exploring auto-save approaches, and we'll hear from them later. Have the next slide. So why are we here? Auto-enrolment has successfully brought many workers who were previously excluded into pension saving. But there's now a huge gap between employed people and self-employed people. So whilst nearly 9 in 10 eligible employees save into a pension, only around 2 in 10 self-employed people do so. Self-employed people are not included in auto-enrolment, although there have been successive commitments to include them in future. The Minister for Pensions recently said, "We rightly celebrate the progress of the last decade in getting people saving, but it's time to complete the job." Auto-enrolment is a great thing, but we still need to be ambitious for making it work better, and that includes thinking about how to include self-employed people. We've been working on this issue for some time at Nest Insight, firstly conducting research to better understand the problem and the opportunities, and then exploring potential solutions, starting with more communications and messaging-based approaches, and then moving into exploring prompts and nudges and different savings mechanisms. Some learnings to frame this discussion today first off. So the first thing that I want to say is that self-employed people are not a homogenous group. One of the things that we've done here at Nest Insight is to stop saying the self-employed, because it is not one group. It is made up of people in very different circumstances. I think when we started out on this work, the stereotype was sort of an IT contractor, a designer, people who were looking to grow their business. But we've actually seen, that's often not the case. People may not be looking to grow. They may not see what they're doing as a business. And indeed, one of the most striking findings from the first bit of research was that around half of self-employed people don't separate their work money from their personal money. They do it all in one bank account. We also understand that self-employed people use multiple different ways to manage their money, many different tools and platforms. There is no one silver bullet or platform that we could build retirement saving into to reach all of them. So, in better understanding the problem, we have explored the barriers. And first of all, it's worth saying that there are some behavioural barriers that were true of employed people pre-auto-enrolment. So all of the things that auto-enrolment was designed to address, inertia, present bias, those kind of just human biases, they exist in self-employed people too. But they obviously lack an employer. So although previously, people have talked about automatic enrolling self-employed people, who would do that? Where would you do that? An auto-enrolment, I think it's probably worth breaking that down, because we talk about it as if it's one thing, but actually, if you're an employed person, there are several steps to that support to get started with retirement saving that self-employed people don't have. So the employer puts in place a pension scheme, they automatically enrol you in it, they provide information about it, they make contributions on your behalf that flex to your income, and they automatically re-enrol you after a period of time if you opt out. So there are many different ways in which auto-enrolment is supporting people to save. We also know that amongst self-employed people there are varying levels of knowledge and confidence, and one of the things we explored early on was sort of how motivating tax relief is to self-employed people. The answer was very, but many of them didn't know about it, so that there are just some kind of bits of information and understanding that many self-employed people lack. The thing that really stands out, I think, about self-employed people that we need to keep in mind is that they often have variable income, and even if they don't have variable income, they have uncertain income. So even if your income is regular, will your client pay the next bill? You know, you're always waiting for that. Or indeed kind of expenses, so will you need a new van? This uncertainty really governs how self-employed people respond to retirement saving. They also face affordability challenges because they earn less on average than employed people. And there are limitations in what self-employed people can do currently to save for retirement. So you can save a regular monthly pound amount, but that doesn't flex to your income. And we know that self-employed people sort of often save an amount that feels comfortable in a bad month, not necessarily in a good month, and don't put that amount up over time if they start doing better. Or you can save an ad hoc one-off amount, which can be really good and can fit really well, but often people don't think of it, don't know that they can do that. There is a bit of received wisdom that self-employed people don't like pensions or aren't into saving for retirement. We've not seen that. So what we see is a big gap between intention and action as a result of all the barriers. So I said earlier that only 1 in 5 self-employed people are actually saving into a pension, but 3/4, the majority, say that it's important to put aside money for retirement. So this is an inclusion gap. It's a policy gap. It's also a commercial opportunity because there are lots of self-employed people who want to save who aren't currently doing so. Have the next slide. So in the previous phase of this work, we explored some potential solutions that were possible in the real world in the current regulatory framework. With Nest, we looked at timely communications around the end of the tax year and self-assessment deadlines. With Penfold, we looked at variable contributions that flex to income. And with Money Hub, we looked at personalised income responsive nudges to save. So you have more money this month than last month. Would you like to save some of that into your pension? Each of these things were well received and they have potential to boost saving if they are scaled, but they are not enough on their own. So we also explored other ideas that were not so easy to test in the real world, and 2 showed particular promise. So the first one of these is auto-saving. This is support to get started with saving using defaults with opt-outs, as we have done for employed people in the UK. And around 6 in 10 self-employed people said they liked the idea of automatically diverting a proportion of their income into retirement saving. And then the second thing we explored was including a level of liquidity into the vehicle that self-employed people use to save, supporting shorter-term saving alongside retirement saving. People who said that they wanted auto-saving were more likely to say that they would want a solution that combined pension saving and liquid saving than to say they would want a pension-only product. So where we ended up was identifying that something more systematic is needed to support self-employed people to save, but that some of these approaches could also be key to the solution. Various people have proposed the income and tax assessment system as one option, and there are some attractions to that, but there are also some limitations. It's quite hard to change, it wouldn't reach everyone, it's retrospective, and it would mean speaking with people at a time when potentially they've just kind of paid their tax bill as well. We have looked at accountancy software, and the opportunity there increases with making tax digital. But we've also looked at current accounts. There is close to universal coverage, and as long as we include those personal as well as those business accounts, this could be a really good way of reaching self-employed people, although we would need a way to identify them. So today we are delighted to be launching 2 new sets of learning, taking that auto-save and that hybrid saving idea a bit further. We will hear from the Minister, then we'll hear about the research from Emma and Al, and then we'll have a panel discussion, which we hope you'll all get involved in. If you're joining us online, please do submit ideas, suggestions, build questions as we go, and we'll get to as many as possible. So first of all, I would like to welcome the Minister for Pensions, Torsten Bell MP.
I didn't know you were abandoning me to this dangerous-looking audience. Are those cushions actually comfortable? That's what I've been thinking. They are comfortable. Right, well, don't fall asleep on them then. Great. Well, thanks to Nest Insight for the invitation and for all the partners that have worked on this. Commitment to learning is important. As someone that spent 10 years writing think tank reports rather than trying to implement them, I'm obviously supportive of anyone else that's carrying on doing that forever, especially if it's in pensions. I'm conscious there's 2 sessions coming up on the details of the report, so I'm going to resist getting into the weeds of those, tempting as it is, and offer some big picture reflections on just where we are, how this debate fits into the wider pension story that we're all on. I think it's important to remember that, because the big picture of like why are we all doing this, because in the end when we're talking about pensions, it can even feel like we're in the weeds of some regulatory debates, or that we're just talking about financial service products in a way that you might be talking about other products. But it's important to remember that pensions are different. Like, it is pensions that have given us retirement, leisure, choices. Not everyone chooses to use their pension to deliver leisure, but that gives people choices. And when you step back and look at the last 200 years, pensions is one of the big victories of the 20th century over the rest of history, right? It was not usual for people to have any period, unless they happened to have good kids, where they had significant periods of leisure at the end of their lives. And making sure that that is maintained is a really important part of maintaining progress as a society, collectively. Now, people will make different choices about how they want to use those retirements, but like not going backwards on the promise of choices of leisure and retirement is really important. And that obviously didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen by design either, but it didn't happen by accident. Productivity growth delivered it. Policy choices on the state pension side delivered it. Institutions on the public and private side delivered it. And ultimately, pensions, as opposed to just savings products, any other kind of thing, delivered it. Now, where are we now? Because that's obviously a very large picture. But as I say, let's not lose what we're trying to overall achieve. We're trying to achieve a world where the vast majority of people do have choices about how they spend, particularly their later years. Now, where are we now? Well, we're in a world where one system is delivering retirements today, and another system has been half born. Yeah. So most people are retiring today by volume. What we're seeing is drawing down of defined benefit schemes. And what we're building up is a defined contribution world, but it is only half born. And when we say half born, mainly when I'm in the pensions world, I hear people talking about, the savings rates aren't high enough. That is not the only question. I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot later, but that is not the issue. It's only half born in a much bigger sense. We've created a system that's largely about savings pots, not about creating pensions, and we need to wrestle with that. And here's just one fact I don't think I hear people talk about enough. Only 45% of the working age population is not saving into a pension. Right? We talk about, because we're used to, we see the stats, the 88% or the 80% of employee statistic you'll see a lot, but that is 55% of the working age population. So nearly half at any given moment are not saving anything into a pension. So let's just hold on to that, because we're going to obviously, the self-employed sit as one part of that problem, not the only part. The next point, we've got to see pensions not in a vacuum. So the pensions are hugely influenced by things outside of the pension landscape. 2 of the huge ones: housing. What housing costs do we expect most pensioners to be bearing? And more relevant to today's discussion, the labour market, how it changes. Now, I'll just give you 2 examples before I come to self-employed. So the national living wage, big increases in the relative hourly wage of low-paid workers, being ramped up over the last 25 years. Remember, over the last 25 years, almost every year, lower hourly paid workers getting a higher percentage growth in their earnings than the middle and the higher earners, the exact opposite of the 25 years before. How does that interact with auto-enrolment? Well, it means that the hourly pay rate is less likely to be the reason people don't qualify for auto-enrolment. Again, people don't talk about that very much, but it's a very large change. Remember, just the increase this April is worth £1,400 a year to the full-time worker on the minimum wage. Right? So these are big changes. Pushing the other way, also not talked about enough, is falling average hours for low-paid workers, particularly men. Well, in fact, only really men. Women work shorter hours on average at lower pay, but the increase in shorter hour working is amongst men at lower paid grades, which is pushing the other way and pushing more people below the threshold there in terms of qualifying for automatic enrolment. Now, where does self-employment fit in? Well, one, it is a huge area of change in the labour market. if I take the whole 25 years of this century, we're talking about 1 million more self-employed people. Now, that's population growth as well, but a significant increase in the self-employed population. Not over the last 5 years, in brackets. I don't think we should be totally confident about the data anyway, but let's leave that aside. But not in the last few years, but generally over the 25 years, clearly a big rise. And before anyone says that's about technology, we don't see that in lots of other countries, by the way. So the UK stands out for the scale of the self-employment increase over this century, so it's particularly important that we solve this problem. On the scale of the problem, the 18% versus the 80% of employees, or the 88% of eligible employees, is the kind of one we all focus on. I'll just give you another one, because when you're thinking about how do we kind of chunk up that gap of people who are not saving, there are 3.4 million self-employed people not saving for a pension, and that compares to 2.9 ineligible employees. Right. So the self-employment problem is bigger than the ineligible employees problem. Now, both are significant. They're different parts of the population, but that gives you a sense of the scale. On the nature of the population, so I always slightly struggle with they're very diverse, because it's obviously blindingly obviously true. It's just a nightmare for anyone to make policy with, because, if everything's just very diverse and complicated, then we all just go home because it's impossible. So I prefer to think about the self-employed as bifurcated. Okay, so yes, traditionally the old self-employed, with which there are lots of in here, not this building, but around Canary Wharf, you've got lots of kind of IT workers, people in their 50s and 60s, have been employees in the past, well above average earnings, who are being self-employed for a range of reasons, not all of which are to do with tax, and we're probably less worried about them. Overall, they tend to have higher wealth, they'll tend to have higher earnings, they'll tend to have higher pension provision. Then you have where all the increases in self-employment. That part of the self-employment population isn't massively growing. All of the increase in recent years, at least since 2010, is in the lower paid, solo self-employed. Remember, there's been no increase in self-employed who have any employees at all. Right? So all of this, like it's people setting up companies, it's garbage. There's no evidence of that in the self-employment numbers. We might like to see that. There might be other ways people are setting up companies, but that is not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is a growth in solo self-employed, not employing anybody. Secondly, we're seeing a growth in low-paid self-employment. That's why I say bifurcated. Lower qualifications, younger, low earning, less likely to be happy that they're self-employed. Yeah, that's the other half of the population. And if you look at them from the earnings distribution, you're looking at low earners. If you look at them from the household income distribution, you're disproportionately looking at low income households, right? The self-employed, again, are bifurcated on the household income distribution, overrepresented at the bottom and overrepresented at the top. Yeah, that's what we see in the data. The population does not stand out, and this is important, for not having retirement plans, because no one does. Right? There's not an interesting difference between, some really keen people do, they're all in this room, but for the population as a whole, they're not unusual in not having retirement plans. As I say, it's not like employees prior to the introduction of auto-enrollment were all there with the spreadsheets, okay? It's called humans. Humans don't have retirement plans because it's a long way off and quite scary and a bit complicated. Then I think it's important to break the problem down. What is the self-employment problem that we are wrestling with, apart from the obvious, which is we haven't got enough people savings and we're worried about the long-term consequences of that? There's three distinct bits of the problem that I try to wrestle with. So one is the mechanism problem, which is largely what you're touching on earlier. And the mechanism problem is no employer, weaker incentives, weaker mechanism for making those payments, and then no nudge, depending on how much weight you want to put on the nudge. But obviously in this world, by nudge we mean very, very, very strong shove in the pensions landscape. It's not really a nudge in any meaningful sense. That is a big problem. And if I'm honest, given that we've known about that problem for 15 years, it's remarkable how little progress we've made on what is the best answer to that hard mechanism problem. Then we've got the growing bits of the problem. So the low income problem, so levels, the low income problem, that is a cash problem. What does it do to your living standards if you save more money for tomorrow? Right? And that is common across low paid workers, whether they're employees or they are self-employed. Okay, that is distinct from the volatile income problem, which is less a cash problem and is a cash flow problem, particularly at the lower paid. And the reports, without me giving away everything of them, do have some interesting things to say about that. But we should think about those three problems distinctly, because they're different problems. Solving one of them would count as a triumph for any report. Right, on to answers, just quickly. One, we obviously need some. I talked about the scale of the problem and the fact that we haven't made enough progress. That's obviously why DWP is funding this work, and is very glad to see it happening with Nest Insight and partners. Next point, loads of the answer is outside pensions. Right. So we should always be clear, as I say, where are other policy areas or other changes in the world having an effect on the pension landscape? Here it's absolutely true that there's employment law issues we have to wrestle with about what's enforced, what not, what is real self-employment, what is bogus self-employment, and that's on us as the government to do, and you'll have seen the employment bill we're taking through at the moment. Secondly, if I took all of the reports written about this problem over the last 15 years, and I'm being very unfair here, and I'm in advance apologising to everyone in the room that wrote some, I've been in that category too. An unfair summary would be, they said, look at all these self-employed people not saving, full stop. How about we do something with the tax return, full stop, broadly. So I'm being a bit unfair, but not much. Now, what's good about this report and this work is it's adding banking systems to the mix. Because everyone says the only thing certain in life is death and tax, but banking's pretty high up the list. You're doing pretty well if you're avoiding banking nowadays. So that is important as an important addition to the mix of answers. What does the work reinforce? Well, some things we already knew. Opt-outs work. People don't hate automaticity if it's something worthy, and pensions are worthy. Tax relief is weak. The effective tax relief alone is weak, and isn't. If tax relief was the answer, just the existence of it, well, we wouldn't be having this problem, would we? Right? So I'll just gently nudge on that. So there's no point anyone writing us a report saying more awareness will solve things. Like, that wasn't true for employees, it's not true for the self-employed. We just wait another 10 years, and that's another generation not saving for their pension. What's new in the work? The importance of flexibility. The lab evidence showing us that flexibility about those savings, because of the cash flow problem I mentioned earlier, is important, possibly more important, although I don't know that from this work, but possibly more important for the self-employed. Then just three last thoughts. So one, what's next for Nest and Lloyds? Well, getting from the lab into the real world, so I'm really looking forward to seeing that, and obviously we'll be supporting that. What's next for the government? Because one thing I always say is there's a similarity between governments and people. There's only one, which is they can all leave pensions until it's too late. And we are not going to do that. So we've obviously done the pensions investment review, over the last few weeks introduced a pension schemes bill, which I'm looking forward to taking through the House. But we'll shortly be launching the next phase of the pensions review, which will be looking at these exact questions for the whole population, though, not just for the self-employed. What do we think about pension outcomes, both the levels and the fairness of them? Where does that go from here? And so I'll look forward to discussing that with lots of you when we get that launched, as I say, in the near future. And then just last point to wrap up, which is, why are we doing all of that? Because we mustn't let the 21st century lose what the 20th century won, which is the existence of materially retirements that they are full of work in different ways, but they exist, they are secure, they're taken as a natural thing in our lives. That is a huge thing that humans have won. Productivity growth would help sustain them and get them longer, but we need to make sure that we're delivering the institutions and the pensions that make that possible. So that's why this work's really important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Emma. I'm research lead for the self-employed programme at Nest Insight. Today, I'll share findings from research we conducted over the summer and autumn of last year that moves beyond self-report of autosave models and instead explores the decisions people actually make when presented with such options in more realistic conceptualisations. I'll then hand over to Al from Lloyds Banking Group, who'll share insights from their early conversations that they had with a small group of self-employed individuals about hybrid saving and also opt-out saving models in the banking context. Together, this research moves the conversation forward with practical solutions for self-employed people. And we're excited to bring you along as we build on this momentum in the coming year. So if we could move on to the next slide. So before I get into the research, what do I mean by opt-out retirement savings? Most of you will be familiar with the concept of opt-out models, where an individual is signed up to something, in this case, retirement saving, unless they say they don't want to. They opt out. It's been hugely successful at increasing participation in retirement savings amongst those who have an employer without reducing people's choice. And so, as the Minister suggested, exploring whether it could be possible to extend this to the self-employed people is worth our collective effort. I want to be really clear about two things that are crucial to remember as we discuss opt-out retirement saving, including the research here today. First, these models preserve choice. Where people actively have to sign up to save, they have a choice: save or don't save. Where the default is flipped to opt out, they have the same choice: save or don't save. To be the case, the opt-out model should be simple and transparent, and it should be very easy to opt out if an individual wants to do so. Second, opt-out models aren't about getting all self-employed people saving. It's about making it easier for those who want to save to get started. Some won't need it. They'll have retirement saving or plans for retirement elsewhere, or they need the money today. And it's really important that they have that choice. In fact, control and flexibility for self-employed people is something that we hear a lot. And opt-out mechanisms can preserve both while offering support to those who want and need it. It's also important to remember that while I use auto-enrolment for those with an employer as a helpful comparison, Jo mentioned that as a population, self-employed people are different to people with an employer, and so our expectations should be different too. That means that what is designed to meet the needs of self-employed people should and will look different to what is designed for employed people. It also means that as we start to empirically test this idea, we need to explore some of the concepts and ideas in greater detail. A couple of notable examples are: 1, what is the retirement saving product? Maybe it's a pension or a LISA, or maybe it's something completely new that doesn't exist yet. Maybe people could continue to save into their existing or previous workplace pensions. Maybe it's different saving. In the current study, we avoided being too specific about this, but it's likely the answer to this question would affect participation. Second, where does the automatic enrolment and opt-out mechanism sit? You need a platform or a collection of platforms that is near universally used by self-employed people. It's previously been suggested that HMRC might provide the right platform, given it's used by almost all self-employed people. An alternative is accountancy or payment software, where individuals may receive payments or manage their liabilities more actively. It might also be a banking platform. Given self-employed people will almost all have either a business or personal account which they interact with regularly, this could provide a good option. In the current work, we focused on the latter. But all of these suggestions have pros and cons that are worth greater consideration. Again, they too will affect participation. So given we know self-employed people are different to employed people, and the design would need to be different, the main aim of this research was to explore how self-employed people respond to an opt-out model of retirement saving. We also wanted to get an idea of what some of the barriers to implementation might be, and things to consider when designing it. There's nothing like actually trying to design a concept, trying to design something to work out what might be missing from our understanding. Focusing on the first of the two phases, our primary objective was to determine whether an opt-out approach to retirement saving placed somewhere in the private sector could effectively support self-employed people and might be worth pursuing further. To explore this, we conducted an online lab study involving over 1,500 self-employed people. Each participant was presented with an enrolment journey into a retirement savings account positioned within an app that they were told they could use to help manage their finances. It's notoriously difficult to talk to people about opt-out savings in the abstract. We know from the work the government did around communicating the opt-out mechanism to the traditionally employed before 2012 that initial reactions to the concepts were often different to the response people actually had when presented with the idea with concrete details. Presenting the journeys in the app allows for the concept to be more realistic. This was the first UK-based online study, to our knowledge, to explore how self-employed people might respond to these mechanisms. The goal wasn't to create a perfect real-world solution, but to test a plausible version of the concept in a low-risk environment where the current regulatory framework doesn't apply. The retirement journey was designed in one of three formats. Opt-in, so participants have to actively sign up. Opt-out, where participants are automatically enrolled unless they choose to opt out. And opt-out with a liquid savings buffer, so contributions first go into an accessible account and then they roll into the retirement account only when a savings threshold is reached. I'm just going to pause there for a moment to just quickly describe what I mean by the accessible savings account rollover. We called this a feeder account in the research. It's a little bit different to what you might have seen described as sidecar previously. Both are types of hybrid savings account. In the feeder model, all contributions go into the accessible account before rolling over into the retirement account when a threshold is reached. And in sidecar, contributions are made simultaneously into the retirement and accessible accounts, with contributions from the latter rolling into the retirement account when a threshold is reached. There are benefits and drawbacks to both, and our use of the feeder model here and in the Lloyds collaboration is not an assertion that this is how we think it should be designed, but rather a recognition that we need to start the research somewhere, and starting with a fully accessible comparison feels like a good place to start. The opt-out model, in the opt-out model, you need defaults. And so we made a number of reasonable assumptions in this study about things like contribution levels, threshold for rollover, the product design, and how the accessible and retirement savings accounts would interact. We hosted a couple of roundtables on some of these concepts and spoke to a lot of people from industry, policy stakeholders, sector experts, and also a small group of self-employed individuals too. Their input helped us shape a journey that was both plausible and relevant. The retirement journeys were positioned within a larger app, and all participants completed 3 tasks. So the first of the task was to sign up to the app. The second was to do a tax journey that helped sort of contextualise people within the app. And then the third was the retirement journey. And you can see a couple of the examples of the screens that participants saw there. It's important to note that we kept the screens as similar as possible and only changed things relevant to the opt-out mechanism. And we also asked people to rate how much they liked the app so that we could be sure that what we were seeing was a difference in the mechanism and not a difference in liking the route of the journey of the app they saw. So what do we find? It will surprise nobody here that opt-out models significantly boost participation in retirement savings. It gets people started in a way that just isn't achieved by other mechanisms. What's more, adding an accessible buffer seems to be at least as appealing, if not more appealing, than just having the retirement savings. This is an exciting step in the research. Of course, we shouldn't expect 9 out of 10 self-employed people to start saving overnight, nor do I think that it's a realistic goal to aim for, full stop, given what we know about self-employed people. But the fact that there is a difference between behaviours that we see for the opt-in and opt-out journeys when everything else is held constant shows the idea is worth pursuing. There are a couple of other reasons that are listed in the report as to why the levels we see here might be higher than you see in reality, that you might see in reality. So I encourage you to have a look at the report for that. Interestingly, participation didn't differ by gender, ethnicity, equivalised income, or type of self-employment. We did see some differences for age, where those in the opt-in group saw an age-related drop-off in participation. That was removed with opt-out. We also saw that income volatility reduced participation in the opt-out group, but only when not when a liquid buffer was included. This is interesting given income volatility is a key characteristic of many people's experience of self-employed work, and one that can make people reluctant to lock money away. Hybrid account structures could help solve this problem and reach a group who may particularly need support to build resilience today, as well as save for retirement. There's also a possible interaction between income volatility and the default rates used in the opt-out journeys that participants saw, and whether or not they used the accessible feeder account or not. Opt-out models require there to be a default, and we know from broader literature that these tend to be sticky, and we found that here too. Combined with the finding on volatility, that raises an important design question. If we set a higher default, which there may be an argument for if it leads to more meaningful levels of saving, would the buffer become even more critical? A higher contribution rate would mean less cash on hand if the money went straight into an illiquid pension, and so you might expect higher levels of opt-out than we see. But a higher contribution combined with accessible accounts should reduce this concern considerably, given people have the confidence of knowing they can access the money if they need to. This is the type of question that we'd love to explore in future. Encouragingly, more than 3/4 of participants said they would like to be offered an opt-out saving model or didn't mind. And those who experienced the accessible account element also rated that as being important. Participants' responses generally suggested that they understood the mechanism and they welcomed the support. One person summed it up by saying, "The fact it can all be done automatically, if I have to remember to transfer the money to an account, I'm less likely to do it." That sentiment captures the power of well-designed defaults, making saving the easy choice. What does it tell us what do these results combined tell us? If we can crack the design and test implementation in practice, there is a huge opportunity to get self-employed people saving for retirement. For policy and practice, it probably means that we need to further explore how to embed saving mechanisms into the platforms self-employed people already use, and the designs for each might be different. Second, designing for liquidity as well as longevity is likely to be best and has resonated strongly in previous research. Finally, self-employed people are diverse. They are welcoming of support, but whatever design as an industry we come up with has to work for them. We owe it to them to find a solution that makes it easier to meet their retirement saving goals without adding complexity or confusion. In closing, this programme of research confirms what many of us already knew. Self-employed people don't need persuasion to save. They need better systems that make saving the easy choice. If we can get the design right, we have a real opportunity to support self-employed people who want to save for retirement to achieve their goals. There is more for us to learn and further design questions and considerations to look into. I'm going to pass over to Al Verity, who is Design Squad Leader at Lloyds Banking Group, to talk us through some of their customer testing that we worked on together, and early thoughts on their potential of hybrid accounts and an opt-out model. I hope it will reiterate for you the potential that lies in further exploration of this idea, and also acknowledge some of the barriers that we need to overcome to get there. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. I have a few slides, so I'm going to try and keep up with them on my phone because I can't see behind me at the same time. But I'll give Josie a nod when if we can move me to the first one, which is a fairly straightforward. What were we briefed to look at? And not surprisingly, it was how do we help self-employed people save a little bit more for their later life in retirement. I think what we found through the research as well, when they think about retirement, it's not necessarily the cliff edge of an employed person. It's a lot of the people we spoke to were sole traders, we spoke to musicians, artists, those type of people who actually they do what they like doing, and that's what they get paid to do. So they sort of perceive that they'll be doing that for a while, not stopping and never doing it again. So the whole retirement was an interesting thing for them, but that was our brief. We were focused on pensions, but we did, in doing that, kind of consider are there other ways to help them move into a pension, which feels a bit long, feels a bit out, a long time away, isn't accessible. are there other things we could do to help them on that continuum of, I guess, from an easy cash saving through to more complicated pensions and investing. Now, if you could slide me on again, Josie. So our approach, we had 6 weeks, small team, as myself, the Nest team. We did research, a couple of guys on the research, and we did an actual UI UX designer to bring to life our ideas. But we operated in 3 sprints across the 6 weeks. So the first kind of couple of weeks was really all about what is the concept? How do we just put that in front of people and get them to start understanding what we're trying to create? We obviously, the second round of that, we started to bring that to life in an actual prototype. Caveat on what you'll see later on, they're not production-ready designs, but they were good enough to test out the ideas. They are in Lloyds branded assets, so they do look and feel like a Lloyds app, but they're not to the level of quality that we'd be releasing into the wild. So just a slight caveat on that. So we brought them to life in the second sprint. Obviously, we're learning as we go a little bit as well. And then in the third round, we evolved the prototype itself, but also we kind of dialed in, what if we created a regulatory regime that was a little bit akin to auto-enrollment, where there was a government scheme pushing users into, actually, there's a start date for retirement savings for this thing, and you can get this from your bank. So we changed the kind of dynamic around that a little bit. We led customers through that on the way into the research. So we presented some kind of ads and flyers that look a bit like auto-enrollment type things to get them thinking, okay, now I'm going to come into this, I'm in a different environment. If you could move me on again, Josie, to the wonderful, what does this actually look like? Well, not surprisingly, in line with some of the things Emma was talking about, we looked at a hybrid account, and we had this obviously in a banking environment, so it was one payment out of your current account. And interestingly, when we spoke to the people, there's a lot of people who don't have a commercial banking relationship with us. They just use another account or even their current account for their salaries coming in. So back to the question of how do you identify these people in a very hard and fast way. Again, we had the luxury of this is a concept, not needing to do all the hard lifting on. And I was chatting earlier to one of the guys about APIs and HMRC integrations and all that sort of stuff. We didn't need to worry about that. We just had to look at, is there something that's sensible enough that gets people thinking that way around? So one payment out of your current account, let's call it, into a cash saver. I mean, in our language, very straightforwardly, we played around with a cash ISA, an investment ISA, and obviously the pension was the continuum of cash and low risk through to an accessible, through to, okay, I'm now need to understand investing, can still access it, kind of. Takes a little bit of time to sell the asset and get the money out, but it's not locked away forever, onto obviously now into the pension, which is conceptually the same, just longer range, slightly different tax treatment. And I'm deliberately almost talking in very simple language because that's what we had to do with customers. We talk about the whole thing about tax relief came up earlier. People just didn't really resonate with them. They didn't even know it, or if they did, relief doesn't feel like what actually it's kind of a top up. So we did play around with the language a little bit to try and get people to understand that. But yeah, the concept was one payment in, the cash saver fills up, and at a certain point in time, we take money out of that cash saver. We played around with 2 different ways. We talked about initially a threshold that you built up to, and then we talked about a buffer that you protected. And I think we found the buffer was probably slightly more favoured. So the money comes in, we take money in monthly, the pot builds up, or the cash saver builds up, and then every 3rd month we would take money out. So whatever you've built up beyond the buffer, we would take the money out and put it into, and at the start we'd split it into an investment ISA and a pension. For argument's sake, we just split it 50-50. Didn't go too deep on how do you want to design 50-50 or 70-30, just we're going to put it into 2 places. The visualization on the right of the slide, we use that in the app, and you'll see that in the journey as we get to, because talking to this without something visual was really hard. By mistake, in one of the sprints, we actually had one or 2 users came in and we didn't have this built into our prototype, and the whole thing just ground to a halt because people the researchers were having to work really hard to explain what is going on and what is this all about. So the visualization was really important. Admittedly, I think we can do more with that. We talked about video as well. Maybe that could be a way of bringing this to life a bit better. But it's really tricky, and certainly with words, it's even harder. And you'll see as we go through, there's a lot of words in the screens on a small handheld device. It's not perfect. But people did understand it, but it's from a design perspective, you'd want fewer words. It was quite heavy. I'd briefly, on terms of who we spoke to, each of the sprints, we spoke to about 6 customers, 6 users. They were sole trader type people. I give you examples of the types of occupations earlier. So not people with a small business as such, it was just people who were self-employed. You could slide me on again, Josie. So we looked at this kind of flow across how do we get them, wake them up, how do we enrol them, how do we get them to review, and then manage downstream. We tried to really mimic the auto-enrolment journey as well, and the language to a certain degree. You enrol, you sign up to it with defaults. And broadly speaking, people were okay with that, but there's obviously, I guess, conduct questions around do people really understand? In the early sprints, we had people flying through, tapping 2 or 3 times, going, and the researchers were asking them, are you sure you get this? Yeah, I think so, I'm happy. Are you sure? I'm confident enough to keep going. Happy to go to the next stage. So we did get people signing up to effectively 3 products all in one go with defaults. We were had to pinch ourselves a bit and go, do people really get it? And that's one of the questions I think we left hanging really with this is we do need to be sure people understand that. But again, positive signals. So that was the flow we kind of went through. We majored on the sort of upfront part of how do we get them into it. But in kind of convincing them to get into it, you kind of have to explain how it's going to work downstream as well, as we'll see in later slides. If you could move me on again. So we'll get into the meat of this in terms of what did it look like. So this was the early part of the engagement. So the image on the left there is kindly provided by the Nest guys. Very similar to what was used in auto-enrolment, but just slightly different messaging, but about the government's going to help you as well. We're going to help build it's a scheme that's coming. We've got, when we started getting into that change or that imagined change to the regulatory framework, we started getting into language like an activation date, because this thing is going to start on a certain point in time. That was quite helpful in a way. It gave us, if you were signing up, let's say it was, from memory, the activation date was, call it June 1st or something like that. The imagined scenario we had with them was, okay, you're ahead of time, you're in the springtime, it's April or March. You can set this up in advance and it will activate on a certain date. You've got 3 months to come back in and look at this, check your defaults. You've got time to think about it. It's not do it now and it's done and you've forgotten it. But we emailed customers, was the middle image there, position what this was all about, and then a click through into the light, starting to get you into our app in the light green image that you've got there, saying welcome. This is what the account's all about. You probably can't quite read the words there, but it's very trying to get across that you've got something that does you for now, the cash, something that might help you in the medium term with your investing, and something for later. Is how we tried to frame it. And you move me again, please. Thank you. And this just continues the journey. So the welcome, here's the account. You'll recognise the image coming through again, the infographic. This is what it's all about. I'll just pause on the 3 types of that, through the cash, the investment ISA and the pension. Absolute change in the atmosphere in the room, albeit observing it, you're sitting on the other side of a one-way mirror kind of thing, watching the participants. But when we started talking about investing, you could feel people just don't like that. Investing's complicated, it's difficult, I don't, and funnily enough, they all sort of nodded to, I get that I need something for my later life when I'm not working as much, but I'm still doing a bit of the thing I like doing, that's my job and my employment. So I get that I need a thing for that, and I get that that's a pension. I don't really get that sort of does the same thing, it invests in stuff. People didn't see that at all, and got very nervous about the investment ISA. Real change in temperature, I don't like it. As we went through the 2 sprints, the last sprint we just made that, you probably just about see it on that, we made that an optional thing. We didn't default you into that. So if you wanted to add it, you could, but if you didn't want it, it was fine. We didn't need to do that. So really that was pretty much straightforwardly. You go through that journey, we onboard you, we give you the welcome, this is the thing, this is how it works. We just need to check who you are, really, is all we're asking, and we're going to set this up on a default basis. This was the leap of faith moment on the right there with the HMRC integration. We were talking about this earlier, but we're just presuming this can be done, right? It's easy, but it does get to the how do we definitely identify that you are who you say you are, and you're definitely a self-employed person. I mean, obviously we know who the user is from a banking perspective, but we don't necessarily have all of the bits that we need to say this is absolutely, at this moment in time, this is a self-employed person. But we took that leap of faith, and as I say, because we were concepting, we had a little bit of poetic license on that to do that. If you could move me one more, Josie, thanks. So once you've onboarded, and literally that's it, it's welcome, you're on board now, you've done it, you've set up your thing, we've set you up on a default basis. So what that means is we're taking the money out of your current account, we're taking £100 a month, and we've set you up £150 a month, and we've set you up with a buffer of 500 quid. That's it. So don't you tell us what you're putting in, what the pension's going into. We are just going to take, when that money builds up, whatever's left above after the third month, we're going to take that and we're going to put it into your pension. Your pension's set up on a middle of the road, and we played around with the middle of the road. We played around with the word risk versus opportunity, or trying to get that when we talk about different appetites to risk and all that type of stuff. We were trying to avoid that completely, but acknowledging that there is a difference. But let's try and frame it as this is in a more positive way. Do you want to go super adventurous and potentially get lots back, but there's potentially a little bit more risk as well? Or can we frame it as if you go into this middle thing? It's safe, but it's also good enough, and trying to position that in a much more positive light rather than risky light, if you like. The fact that we talk about investment risk, maybe just people again just rail a little bit. So we tried to play with that a little bit, try and get it more positive. But we'll put you into the middle level risk, safe as I suppose a default fund we might call it if we're in our own businesses in a pensions office, but customers don't see it that way around necessarily. We'll put you into the default fund, and we're going to take this amount. You don't need to tell us how much you're going to put into it, because we're going to work that out based on the contribution we're taking out of your current account and how much is built up. So there's not a lot for the customer to do to get into the product. But conversely to that, or because of that, we were trying to put break points in. So how do we that's cool, and people were saying, I do trust you, and the trust came into it quite a lot around as a banking provider, we've got to trust that you're going to do the right thing for us. But actually this is complicated, and I welcome you doing that. So you've plenty of opportunity to review it. You can see in the yellow, you can't quite see these great, but you'll see because we set up the account from the deep with zero money in it, so you can just see the thing ahead of that activation date. No money's gone in. You can just see that it's sitting there. You can check your defaults. We're telling you that there's a countdown almost. There's 3 months till it goes live. Do you want to defer the start? Do you want to come out of it? Nobody was interested in that. They were quite happy to go, no, if I'm in. I'm all right with this. And I'm conscious of time, so I'd slightly speed up a little bit, having had the 3-minute chaser. So once just to pause on the government incentive, the saving supplement that we brought in as well. So if we are in a regime where we're saying there's a scheme and it's encouraged, if not mandated, it's auto-enrolment-esque, we want you in. We explored, well, would you want an incentive back from government on top of and Graeme was interested the other day when we talked about this, what you mean on top of the 20%? Yes, on top of the 20%, actually money back for you. And we landed on we tested two things, 20% of whatever you've put in coming back to you at the end of the year, either as a return off your tax return, or we put that money into your pension. I'd say 9 out of 10 people, or 17 out of 18 people, they wanted it going in their pension. There were comments like, okay, there might be years when I need the cash and I might take it, but as I know that saving for my later life is important, and therefore I'm more likely to take that into my pension. So we did explore that as a kind of add-on to the regime, the regulatory regime change type of thing that we looked at. And as you can see in there, we set them up in defaults. If you want to change them, you just go in and change them. It's up to you. Lots of chance to do that. So once the account's set up, just to come to the last of these slides of what it looks like. Again, because we're in a banking environment, we do a lot. If you bank with Lloyds, you probably see this all the time. You get or any bank will be doing it for sure. Notifications, reminders to do stuff. Things are coming up. So we got that opportunity to bring you back to this product, to say it's live, it's ready, it's using, and also the in those fluctuating months when you've got less income, we can see what's coming in. So we could tell you, we can see your account's a bit lower this month. Would you like us to pause that payment to your saving account, to your self-employed savings account? We tested out options of, do you want to skip a month? So not opt out of the whole product, I just want to skip a month. I use Harry's Razors. I always thought it was a bit like that. I'm sure you all have different subscriptions, but it's like, I don't want it this month. I want to delay it for 3 weeks. I've not used all of the millions of razors you've sent me. I just want to delay it. But I don't want to come out. I don't want to opt out of the offer. I just don't want it now. So in those sort of monthly, those scenarios, you want to skip that payment. Yeah, I'm happy to skip it. The next one will come as normal. You don't need to do anything else. We'll just take the money again. So different ways that we played around, and that flexibility was super key to people. Now that was the thing that really got, okay, this is great, I can see it, it makes sense, it's easy to do, it's one payment in, and if I don't want that one payment coming in, I'll just skip it. Quite straightforward. Okay, if you jump another slide on, I've probably touched on some of this on the way through, but just to finish us off on, if you just do me one more, Josie. There we go. So generally speaking, it went really positive. People, I mean, we were genuinely as a research team, we were, after the last round of this, we were sitting in the room going, we need to pinch ourselves here because we've had such a positive sign on it. There must be stuff that let's just almost like red team it. There must be something that we didn't get right here because we've an overwhelming positive reaction with people walking out of the rooms and the buildings with us going, why are you not doing this already? Really positive signs in that regard. So it made sense for a bank to do it. From our perspective, people were happy with that. It's quite easy to do with all the functionality we've got, as I say. Onboarding via defaults, great, no problem with that. Again, as I say, people would clicking through the prototypes and we were asking them, are you sure? Are you sure you understand it? So there was a bit of that, but people were happy to do it. And yeah, the flexibility on skip, pause, restart, absolutely crucial to it. But then just to counter that, stuff that we didn't get into in this last slide. So yeah, that kind of conduct angle of, do you really understand it? Are we really good with defaults? Is it the right default for you? All of that. So there's a bit there. The mechanics of it, yeah, we didn't get into the mechanics of it. I was a bit flippant about, well, we just make this happen, right? We just do the API integrations and we're all good to go. But clearly there's a bit of thinking around that. Linked to that as well was the kind of buffer contribution balance. If you have too big a buffer, you end up putting a minuscule amount in. Is it actually worth it for anybody, customer included, not just us from a commercial perspective? Is it actually worth it to the customer if they're forever using the buffer? And it's a little bit of a, how do we get that right, get the right amount of balance on giving you access to what you need versus the product serving the purpose it's intended for. Yeah, that is the accessible investment, that investment ISA. Do we really need that to make this work? From what we saw, probably not, but it's a nice add-on if for some people. Yeah, the alternate incentive. So the timing of the incentive, if it's after your first year, actually, do you want something earlier than that to give you that kind of dopamine hit of, right, I've done something good, I've got something back quite quickly. So we didn't get into that. So there's a little bit more stuff that we could do for sure, but positive signals. And lastly, just to end on these verbatims, we'll maybe skip through these and just there's lots of positive signal, as I've said, but this one really sticks out. If you jump to the last slide, Joseph, there. So somebody, this is out of somebody's mouth. I know banks and governments get a bad name, but this is great. Really like the look of this. It's helping. When do I sign up? So I think it was a really positive thing for us. It was as a, if not as a joint exercise to do. Got a lot of learning from it. As I say, some questions still there to go after, but lots of good insight there as well. And that's me finished.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Emma and Al, for talking us through what we've learned in the research. I'm delighted now to be joined by two people who are really well placed to discuss the learnings. Graeme Bold, who is Managing Director Pensions and Retirements at Scottish Widows, and Rob Yuille, who is Head of Long-Term Savings Policy at the Association of British Insurers. I want to make sure that we've got time for some questions and thoughts from the room and online. But before we do that, I'm just going to ask each of you just to give some reflections on what we've heard. In terms of what you think it means, for sort of next steps for all of us, and I will turn to you first, Graeme.
Yep, I'll try and keep it short, seeing as we want to get to questions. A couple of things from my perspective. One off is, I agree completely up front with what the Minister said, that we've got a challenge here with the self-employed. Only 18% of people are actually saving in the self-employed world compared to what's going on in auto-enrolment, where we've now reached $1 trillion of assets that are saved up for people to retire with going forward. So we've got a massive thing that we have to do with the self-employed. And if I look at our own Scottish Widows research, it looks like 25% of people in employment are on track, unfortunately, for poverty in retirement. That's a pretty damning stat, right? But that grows to 50% if you're self-employed. So any lens through which you look at it, we've got to do something about this. Now, what was interesting for us and why we were keen to get involved in the research, as a bank we were well placed. We've got a large SME business footprint across the UK, and we've got over 20 million retail banking customers in the UK, over 20 million people. Now, on our retail banking apps, people are logging into their pension something like 20 times a month, right? That means that people are seeing their pension beside their bank account on a regular basis already. Within the app and within the testing that Al showed you, if you're on a Lloyds banking app, you'll see your current account, your savings account, and if you've got a Scottish Widows workplace pension, you'll see that there as well at the same time. So we've established some of that footprint, and it kind of gave us a thought process of, well, actually, got a digital footprint because you've got to be there where customers want you and where people want. It's got to be easy for them. We've got a set of products that can actually help here, but we need to focus on the three things the Minister said, which is the mechanisms, how do you deal with the volatility, and then how do you deal with the low income piece as well. I would agree completely with the three things that the Minister set out. And then from my perspective, what did I like about the research? The things I really liked about the research was that it was digitally led. As I say, you've got to be where customers are and where they're going in, if it's 20 times a month. I like the flexibility that it gave people. It's really important. As much as we want to kind of have a mandated piece, it's got to be flexible and easy for people within their lives. I think the buffer account is a critical concept from my perspective. I think the idea of moving money from your current account into a buffer account and then only into your pension when you feel safe to do it feels like a must-have mechanism for the self-employed to have that issue of potentially volatile income going forward. And then I think the default mechanisms of having some form of default minimum contribution that's going in across those things is really important as well. So I think, as Alice sort of alluded to as well, we've through the research found something that resonates with real people in their lives dealing with all the things that self-employed people have to deal with. And I think that's what makes the research really exciting from my perspective.
That's great. Thank you, Graeme. And sort of similar question to you, Rob, kind of what do you take away and what does it mean for what we do next?
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations on the research and the collaboration. I think collaborating between government, different bits of industry is how we're going to solve these problems. Welcome some things that the Minister said as well, including the breadth that he attached to it and the importance of incorporating that into the review. A couple of things he said I would pick up on. I wouldn't want to let quasi-employers and fake employment off the hook. If they've got auto-enrolment duties, they should do them, so that there are probably multiple solutions here. And looking at the reasons why liquidity is such an important issue for self-employed people, we could come back to that. There was a couple of things I picked up in terms of the practicalities, which are fleshed out in the research, and Al brought them out as well, about identifying people and getting comfortable with defaulting people. Just to expand on those briefly, again, we can expand further. Generally, there needs to be much better interfaces between private and public sectors in terms of data. So you would need that for your HMRC integrations, just for a simple answer, is this person self-employed or not? You'll need it for digitalisation of relief at source. You'll need it for small pots and bringing pensions into scope of inheritance tax. I thought that Al's solution, as he presented it, looks a bit less like a default. You are signing up to a product which has defaults embedded into it. If you were to try and put a solution in place for a product you've already got, that might be more of a challenge to get comfortable with defaulting. And if, like auto-enrolment, it became mandatory, I think the question's still outstanding about who are you mandating to do what. But if you can create a permissive regime to allow banks and others to do that, then that's brilliant. A couple of other wider points, links to other policy areas and other products, like the range of products. I'm pleased to hear mentioned several times already. There's a consultation on ISAs due, so we could see the landscape and the parameters of ISAs change. That could be relevant. And working for the API, we have an interest in other products available through the workplace. So it's increasingly obvious how important income protection and to an extent private medical insurance is. And that's great for employers and for employees. But there is a risk that we have haves and have-nots within pensions and elsewhere between those in employment and those who are not. And it's fundamentally a financial inclusion issue. My boss, Hannah Gerg, is on the Financial Inclusion Committee, which Treasury is leading, and it is looking at ways to get products to people who aren't already taking them up. And this is highly relevant to that, and the learnings from this could be relevant to them. A couple of other points to explore further around the boundaries of making it very easy to say yes to something. This seems like a very strong case for targeted support, especially for a regulated company like a bank. So there's a clear target market, a consumer need, better outcome if you act and harm if you don't. That's got to be based on good data. So there's a use case around dashboards, open finance, and expansion of open banking. So we'll soon see commercial variable recurring payments, which is exactly what you're trying to do here, which is if there's this much left in my feeder account at the end of the month, then put it all in. And that should solve the Harry's razor problem. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. But there's quite a few things to pick up on, but really appreciate the research. The final point I wanted to say, the feeder account, I agree that's critical. It feels less like a cooling off period, more like a warming up period, which you can flex to get people comfortable with putting people into the next step.
That's great, thank you both. And it's really interesting thinking about how these things are framed. Is it a kind of buffer? Is it something that is warming you up? Is it something that you protect? I think all of this is really interesting to think about. So we have hogged the microphones for quite a long time, and there are many experts in the room and online. Interested in questions, but also in suggestions, thoughts. I think we are part of a community who are trying to solve this problem, so open also to kind of suggestions and comments as well as questions. I'll go first to anyone in the room. Okay, I'm going to go first to Lawrence and then to Nathan. Could you just briefly say who you are when you get the microphone as well?
Hi everyone, Lawrence and I'm Monzo. I've got a couple of reflections. One was about that almost allergy to the idea of investments as a part of your pension pot, and how customers see it as very different, whereas government is moving in the exact opposite direction and seeing pensions as a vehicle for boosting investment. I wondered, is it possible to change customers' viewpoint on that investment piece and how they see risk for future life savings? And then the other reflection is about that sort of tapering of work, self-employed people not necessarily seeing themselves as retiring, but slowing down or perhaps doing more part-time work, and how this is more of a support for their income later into life, rather than being a source of their sole income as they get older.
Graeme, do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, happy to start on that one. I think it's a brilliant question, because actually you're absolutely right. A lot of us in the industry, investing is just a normal thing, right? But actually for customers it's not, and they get confused between saving and investing, and they don't actually know, by investing, where am I investing? Is it the stock market and so on? I think you can start to break down barriers. We've actually just literally in the last couple of weeks put a game into our app to actually sort of, in a really simple way, work with customers to say, do you understand what saving is? Do you understand what investing is? Are you ready for these sorts of things? And then actually work with them to understand, help them get educated on what investing is. So I think there's a lot that you can do, and I would just like to I think back 5 years, think forward 5 years. Right, we're in the middle of a decade of digital revolution in my view. 5 years ago, people were still getting paper statements. Now they're in the digital apps, and we're only just starting to play with gamification. We can make this way more interesting for people to understand what investing is and demystify it a little. And then to your point about people gliding through retirement and still undertaking some work, I think that will be the case. I think a couple of things, any modelling and sort of gaming tools that you give people to understand what their income looks like in retirement needs to take account of that and help them understand it. And then I think it needs to look more broadly. This is not just a pensions problem, and the Minister kind of alluded to that with things like housing and so on. You've got to think, nobody sits down and just thinks about their pension. They think about everything that's going on. So yeah, I think you can break it down, but I think we could do more to bring the other asset pools into play.
Thanks, Graeme. Do you want to add anything, Rob?
Briefly, helping people to understand what they're invested in is question how important it is. I think it's important, but it's an ongoing challenge. And the research does touch on what I would think of as side hustle type employments, or people who have more than one source of income. I think that is a separate challenge. Again, there would be tech solutions to that, but I think it's something that the adequacy review could look into, about looking at it across household level, because it won't be always the case that both people in a household, all people in a household, are self-employed.
That's great, thank you. Nathan, have you got a mic ready?
Thanks. It's Nathan Long from Hargreaves Lansdown here. The research is brilliant and it's definitely moved us on a long way, so congratulations on getting that all done. I won't ask a question about lifetime ISA for once. Instead, I just think that it really throws up loads of interesting design questions, like anchoring of the pound amount that you start with and the buffer levels. I think are really interesting, and how much choice do you give? I think what's really important is that we start to, probably next steps, look at the downstream impact, like for whom is it actually the right thing to have gone into the pension if you expose them to this, and so how do we put in place the nudge only for the people in the right time? I'm talking particularly here about very, very low income households who probably shouldn't save at all. It's really a question more for you, Joe, actually. This has obviously been really, really impactful when you've delivered auto-enrolment through a banking app. I just wonder what kind of learnings you might take from that into auto-enrolment savings. So does it have to go through an employer, through a payroll system, or does this actually open up the opportunity to do it all through banking apps, because it seems to resonate quite well and there seems to be that trust?
And I was reflecting as the Minister was speaking about, the challenge of people who are not saving, not just self-employed people, but people who aren't covered by auto-enrolment. If we think about people with multiple different incomes, if we think about the kind of question of kind of people phasing into and out of work at different points, I think what's interesting to us that came through really early on in the research is that almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody has a bank account. Some of them have several and they have other things, but there is a touch point here that is near universal, which if you put it together with some of the innovation and sort of progress that we're making on connecting things, being able to see a whole picture, not just one account or one person, I think has huge potential. In some senses, we sort of tried to run before we could walk in the Penfold trial we did previously, where we were looking at variable savings mechanisms in the early days of variable recurring payments, where people had to sort of reauthorize it kind of reasonably frequently, and it was quite clunky, but I think the idea was a good idea, and we should think about, as we go forward, how can we best join things up for people, thinking about where they're sitting, not where we're sitting, and how can we see a whole financial picture, not just of what people have, but also kind of across whole of life, balancing those tensions. It's really tricky, but I think there's lots more tools in the box than we used to have to get there.
Can I just make one point in regards to that? I think it's a good question. What's really interesting, the way Al was talking about it, is to get a concept that really resonates with customers, to do something and then feel like this is a good thing for me, is really hard to do. I think that was the biggest thing that I took away from the research, is people actually said, well, this is good for me, I should do this. That's really hard to do. So I think the next challenge is, how do you break down the mechanisms then? How do you make sure the mechanisms don't get in the way of letting you help nudge the self-employed into saving something for the long term? And then secondly, I'd echo exactly what you said. I think by the end of this decade, it's already happening now with open finance, everybody is going to have their kind of financial balance sheet, so to speak, on a digital device. They're going to be able to see everything in one place. And that's going to transform the conversation. We have got massive opportunity over the next 5 years to transform the conversation and understanding of money in the UK, and particularly savings and pensions as well. So that's coming at us, so we should embrace both. Customers want it, and actually the digital stuff's going to open it up.
Great. Have we got any questions online? Take one more in the room and then come back. Can I come to Eve?
Hello, Eve Reid from Smart Pension. Whilst I think it was a 1 monthly payment we were talking about under the concept model, is that correct? Yeah, thank you, Al. Whilst that feels like the obvious choice, do we think that for the self-employed population that necessarily works? So if you think about the flexibility, the fluctuating income that they have, would it make more sense to have smaller regular payments in order to actually get more over into the product? Because at any one time they might only have a certain amount of money in their current account. Is that something that we should consider exploring?
Talk specifically about the research. I mean, from my perspective, absolutely. I think the main concept that lands for me is the idea of a buffer account. If you've got variable income, then actually having some form of buffer is critical. And actually, if you've got data in a banking system that shows you what you've earned over the last 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, you can probably start to give a guide rail as to what a suitable buffer might be for the individual. And then in terms of how you take money out, I think you could play with shapes. You could either wait till it's high and take a bit more. You could do small amounts monthly. You could do once every 3 months. That would be a really interesting concept to kind of play with.
Yeah, that's probably lends to that.
Would you mind passing mine? Joe, would you mind passing yours? I think we've got an issue with that.
That one. Sorry, yeah.
That's all right. Yeah, that last point I made about the mechanics of it, we didn't get into what's the right balance. What is it monthly? To be fair, nobody really objected to monthly, and I think it was 100 or 150 we'd set. There wasn't an allergic reaction to that, but there was it might not work for me. It might, but I think broadly speaking, people were okay with it. But that's not to say you couldn't do it differently, for sure, and on the way in and on the way out, to get that balance of, and back to that, right, when does it become, you try to balance the access to cash versus the point of having this is that you've got access to cash later, which means you need to put something away. So yeah, there's a bit more we could look at there for sure.
Briefly, talking about playing around with the shape, how much goes in, how often, to Nathan's point, what's the right level. We're not talking about writing this stuff into primary legislation here, unlike with auto-enrolment. With these kind of solutions, it is much more flexible.
That's great, thank you. Have we got any questions online? Okay, one more in the room.
Thanks. Hi, Kitty Usher, Group Head of Policy Development at Barclays. This is some amazing insights in here that I think cut to the core of lots of conversations that people in this room are having. I just wanted to push slightly more on what's implied in terms of what government needs to do. What are the sort of policy assumptions behind this? So far, I've gathered there's a whole bucket of stuff around the conduct regime, around targeted support, about what you can actually sort of encourage people to do. There's a kind of elephant in the room around HMRC integration in terms of working out who the self-employed are, which you might not be able to pick up from current account data. Potentially extra incentive to get people to save financially. Good luck with that one. But the thing that really jumped out at me was the way that Lloyds used language around the government's new self-employed savings scheme. And so it gave a sense to customers that this was coming anyway and you could get ahead of it. But what would that really be? Would that be government saying that self-employed people need to have a savings scheme, but you can opt out of it, or is it actually is the mechanism to say to current account providers, actually you need to offer this, and then how does that work? You know, naming no names coming from Barclays, from big high street banks that don't necessarily have a tie-up with a pension provider like some others do. Does that actually feel like a compliance cost, or is there, how does the market innovate for that? So just sort of, I want to push a little bit further on what the policy implications are.
Thanks, Kitty. So I'll turn to both of you. I guess I would add a consideration, which is something that we have come across in the work that we've done, looking at opt-out approaches to workplace savings into cash saving, which is around the regulatory barriers to doing that. And in the environment that we've tested these things in, we've sort of not had to worry about that. But I think there is a piece of work to do to work through, how much is possible under the current regulatory framework, and if we wanted to get towards something that felt like a true opt-out default journey, kind of, is there anything that would need to change? I don't know, Rob, have you got any reflections? I'm going to give you this one.
Shall I try this? No. Okay. It feels like there's a lot you can do without much intervention, and we'll see a targeted support consultation very soon. That would be at the end of the spectrum where you are enabling someone to make a decision based on data about them. In the absence of that, if it was a pure default, it is a question of firms getting comfortable with it. There's something specifically mentioned in the report about the ability to take money out of someone's bank account without them explicitly saying so and putting it into another product. If it's not a firm which is integrated, then you need to look at the commercial relationships between them, say between a software provider and a pension provider. I think Consumer Duty is very helpful here, and that as long as you've fulfilled consumer understanding, fair value, and customer support, then you should be good to go. But I think it's a question of everyone getting comfortable.
Thanks, Rob.
I mean, the only things I would add to that is I think you do need to create the case for change. And I think if the Minister's getting behind it, and if this research allows us all to talk about it more, that's a massive piece. We know about, we want the minimum contributions to go from 8% up. We know that there's a gender pensions gap. All this has been talked about in the industry and across the UK, but nobody's talking about the self-employed at the same sorts of level. So that's the first thing. Create the case that this is coming. We have to do something. I think then the challenges are, yes, you would absolutely have to identify somebody as self-employed, and then you would have to start to work the mechanisms to bring the money across from the bank account, which would be a little bit easier to do. So there are definitely mechanisms there. I think the point of compulsion, or you're in and then you're defaulted out, that's the big one to work out. You would need to know someone's self-employed to then say, you are, this is an option for you, and then deciding how to work from there.
Thanks, Graeme.
But I think we've got to get through the mechanisms, right, because the concept landed with people, that's the big thing.
Okay, anything from online? No? In which case I'll take one more in the room. We've just got a minute, so briefly if you can, and brief.
Hi, Kevin Hart. So we're on the trade body BASDA for software developers in this country. Obviously a fantastic initiative, really behind it. Key couple of things and observations, structural and policy. I think structural, it's all about making it easy. So we've seen that with the app, it's making it easy. In our world, we've got all the details of all the self-employed because that's the functionality we're providing. What's really critical, though, is that have they already got a pension? And is that pension open to contributions? So, unfortunately, the Minister's not been here, but to DWP colleagues, dashboard maps, making dashboard available so that we can actually, in the nicest way, interrogate it to be able to give that facility. Secondly, that because of making tax digital, we've got this touch point now that at least every 3 months, and it's come down by 2028 for 20 to 30 million turnover, 20,000, 30,000 turnover businesses. So there's a frequency of touch point there, which is going to be incredibly valuable to us. My strong recommendation is don't try and use the tax system. Use the harness, the nudges that making tax digital is going to enforce within this. And finally, really, so we can support the elephant in the room, but I think the other elephant is you touched on earlier, and I think the Minister did, about advice and advice versus guidance. So there's still, even when I talk to accountants, bookkeepers, still concern about, am I actually giving financial advice? So I think this is a big one that we actually also need to address.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm actually going to stop us there just to give a few minutes to wrap up. So I would like to thank Graeme and Rob, and again to Al and Emma, and I will hand over to Will to wrap us up. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks, Joe. I'm Will Sandbrook. I'm the Managing Director of Nest Insight, and I was just going to say a few words by way of wrapping us up. Starting just with reiterating some thank yous. So firstly, to all of our speakers today for their contributions and insights. So that's the Minister, Torsten Bell, Verity from Lloyds Banking Group, Graeme Bold from Scottish Widows, Rob Yuille from the ABI, and Joe and Emma from our own team at Nest Insight. So thank you to all of them for their insights today. To the DWP, who have been a partner and supporter of this work now over a number of years, and to our delivery partner in this work, Lloyds, as well, and to our strategic partners, BlackRock, JP Chase and Nest. Big thank you also to all the contributors to this work, of whom there have been a great many and who've shared their expertise for this project. To the team who've delivered the project within Nest Insight and today's event. So I've mentioned Joe and Emma, but also Matthew, Lorenzo and Josie on the research side, Gwen and the team who've delivered today's event, and everyone who's been sat there diligently at the back trying to make the various bits of technology lined up. It's been a slightly experimental event for us today in doing this in a hybrid way in this building. So hopefully it's worked kind of pretty well, and I'm sure there's lots of things we can learn from it, but thank you for bearing with us as we've worked through that. And finally, to those both in the room and online who've joined us today, thank you so much for making this a really interesting conversation and successful event. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on kind of what we've heard and on this work and kind of where it fits for us. I have to admit, we've been doing this work with DWP now over a great number of years, and I've been a bit pessimistic about where we were going to get to, and the Minister kind of touched on why. Kind of everyone who gets involved in this space kind of ends up saying something about the tax system. Everyone ends up saying this is about self-assessment or real-time information or some combination of those things. And I think there are kind of really good practical reasons why we shouldn't expect that to be the solution anytime really soon. But without that, this idea of auto-enrolling the self-employed has sort of always seemed a little bit more theoretical than real. It's a thing that it's kind of easy to say, and then when you get into yes, but who and how, it kind of ends up feeling rather more complicated. And so a couple of things that are really exciting about this work and the conversation we're having today, I think, is that they, in various ways, the work starts to point towards reasons to be a little bit more optimistic about whether there are some solutions here that could work and could work at scale. Partly that's just about, until now, I think all of us who've been involved in pensions auto-enrolment have had a strong intuition that defaults are probably the answer for the self-employed, but we've never actually really tested it. And now we have some robust, albeit still experimental evidence to suggest that not only is auto-enrolment of some form, defaulting for the self-employed, likely to work, but also it's very popular among the people with whom we have tested it. And I think that's always been a bit of a question. But more importantly, in terms of a sense for optimism, I just think the findings from this work could in the future be applicable in the tax system. Right? There are aspects of this that could work in an implementation that uses the tax system, but crucially, what they appear to do is also to work outside of that, and that's really exciting. So to find a place, as Joe described it, near universal platform within which this kind of intervention could be designed, and to start to test that is, I think, a very important step. And it's a little bit easier, therefore, today to hopefully see what a path to kind of implementation and tackling these issues at scale might look like. I've touched already, but I'll highlight again, super important in this is that it seems to have the support of the people it's designed to help. I think historically, again, recognising the heterogeneity among the self-employed population, this is not a population who've always felt terribly helped by policy intervention or always been terribly welcoming of it, and actually to see them kind of coming out of this work and feeling like this is a positive thing is hugely important. So the whole conversation today feels like it's taken on some good energy, some good reasons for optimism, and we're really proud of the research that we've put out and hope that all of you will continue to engage with that. Very clear from the Minister that there is a commitment to address this problem. I thought, as someone who's stood up on a lot of platforms over the years and talked about 80 or 90% participation rates, it's sobering to hear the 55% number that the Minister shared at the outset, but there's a very clear desire and will to address that, and so that's really exciting as well. But the questions at the end, Kitty's question at the end, it does point to this is just the beginning, right? There are a lot of questions implied by this research as well as answers. Questions about scalability, the commercial perspective, the regulatory perspective, something we've learned a lot about in some of our other projects. How do you, once you find a solution that scales, a solution that works, how does it scale? How do you make it possible for people to adopt it and for it to scale? So that's going to be a big focus of the next phase of our work. And we'd love you to help us with it. If there's anyone here in the room or online who's thinking, well, we could be a part of the next phase of this work, we could be a delivery partner, we could be someone who could work with you on this, then please do talk to us, speak to Joe and Emma who are here after the event, or get in touch with us online, and we'd love to have that conversation with you. So you can find the report that we published today and all of our other work on nestinsight.org.uk. Also find details of how to get in touch with us if you'd like to do that and speak to us more about working with us in the future. And I think all that leaves me to do is thank you all again for participating and for your questions and for engaging in the discussion. And I think that's us done. Thank you.